sunglasses?
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. We're talking these. So we're not going to
Yeah.
More people filtering in.
Yeah. As Lisa Epperson told me, it's an on-time island. So you're first, Rob, right? You knew that.
Yep.
Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's forum on the Nantucket landfill. I'm Tom Sidlowski with the Nantucket Civic League. We're delighted to host this forum focusing on issues relating to the landfill. Today's forum is emblematic of the Civic League's mission to promote the general welfare of Nantucket through informed citizen participation in community affairs. The League represents 25 neighborhood area associations with over 2,000 dues-paying families. Today's program can inform both those of you in attendance as well as a much larger audience of island residents. We hope will view it on demand in the coming weeks thanks to NCTV Channel 18. Today's presenters are Rob McNeil, Director of the Department of Public Works, and Cormac Collier, Executive Director of the Nantucket Land Council. After the presentations, we'll be taking questions from the audience. Rob?
Thank you very much, Tom. I appreciate having me here today. It's a pleasure and an honor to be speaking in front of the Civic League today on this important topic, the landfill. So we'll get right started here and let people know where we are. We're out at 188 Nantucket Road. We share the campus. Public Works shares the campus with Waste Options between operations for the landfill and the landfill itself. Zooming in a bit, essentially we have the access driveway into the landfill, the shell drop-off area, and then further up the actual driveway access into DPW. So our discussion today will focus on essentially the Waste Options buildings, their function, as well as the landfill operations. This is a little pictorial of how things used to go. We had few people on the island. We had limited amount of traffic coming into the site, and we had a fair amount of refuse. It was combined as one, came in, depending on who you talk to, it was either burned, crunched, crushed into the old wetland system that was adjacent to Long Pond, and then to put the fire out or the smoldering ashes, they would bulldoze it into the edge of the pond. So there was a lot of all kinds of stories from years ago. with people delivering cartloads of oil and just openly dumping out onto the ground out there. But essentially, you had a situation with an unlined landfill, which is historic around the world, and adjacent to a wetland resource and a pond. So every time it rains, all those wonderful things combine and wash into our groundwater, and potentially have impacts into those water bodies. So moving to today, we have a lot more people. What we have done is channelize traffic into the site, into residential and commercial. We're bringing in a tremendous increase in the amount of materials, but we're handling them very differently. What we're doing ultimately is we've taken the original landfill and we've mined it. So the white space here is the reduction in the original landfill down to something significantly smaller. And we did that for two reasons. One, to lessen the cost of the overall cost to cap that landfill in the end, and to construct these new lined cells. The lined cells essentially collect rainwater and the leachate that it creates and treat it at the wastewater treatment plant, as opposed to the rainwater that comes through the unlined cell and leaches into the ground. So again, the benefit of reducing the overall size of the landfill also contributes to lessening the amount of leachate that's continuing to go into the ground. Secondly, we're creating a tremendous amount of compost with the aerated digester. So that's coming off in various products. And one thing that we're paying attention to is what potential impacts that may have being open on the ground and full of nutrients and good stuff that grows grass and plants. But do those piles have a nutrient impact to the adjacent wetland systems and water resources? And finally, the diverted materials, everything that's recyclable and or taken, put on a truck and shipped off island. So that's it in a nutshell of the differences between the old operations and the new operations. So we break down our solid waste recycling program again as residential, as commercial, and then landfill operations. So we have as you come into the site, off to the left, we have the Boy Scouts tin aluminum collection shed, the take it or leave it, and as you make your way around, the MRF, the materials recovery facility. There, you're dropping off recyclable materials, compact fluorescent bulbs, hard to manage bulky waste, residential solid waste, glass, invasive plants, and metals. I want to just point out a couple things. A lot of those are taken off for profit. We'll package up the marketable materials, bale them in the site, and then send them off to actually generate revenue. One thing, just want to put a reminder out to folks that needles and sharps of all kinds are showing up in all kinds of streams that are being dropped off. I want to remind people that there is a receptacle for sharps at the fire department. So for the safety of everybody involved, the residents and drop off, as well as the workers inside the facility, just putting a point out there to please police your sharps and get those delivered to the proper facility at the fire department. Some changes that have been made to the materials recovery facility recently. Obviously, the traffic pattern has changed, and that's really to address concerns of having backups out onto Nantucket Road and just general orderly traffic, being able to handle the volumes coming in through the peak season on site, as well as not spilling out. We have taken advantage of the dead space that's been created by the glut of paper as the paper market worldwide has evaporated. Because of that, the paper bins at the drop-off were no longer needed and had been sitting idle for quite a while. So we worked together with the Waste Options folks to reshuffle the drop-offs. So right now we have cardboard, we have plastic, and we have tin and aluminum. 3 products, that's it. But we've added bins because we've reutilized the dead paper slots. That has helped us cycle people through the site faster. With more bins available for cardboard, for instance, if you don't have to wait to drop it, you can just dump it in an available slot. And the benefit there is, in the past, people have actually filled those bins up down below, and those commodities that could earn money if they were baled have been diverted into bulky waste because there was no place for those to go. So by having space down below in the building reallocated and expanded to handle a popular product like cardboard that actually is earning money, being able to handle it even through the peak market by adding space underneath and additional drop-off locations has gone a long way in making sure we don't, or we fully capture those revenue-making streams. Plastics, it's a huge topic. So plastics right now, we're essentially doing the work, right? Give us all of your plastics. We don't care what number it is, if it's a film plastic or something like a water bottle, if it's something you peel off from a store-bought item. All of your plastics, residential plastics, should be coming in through the residential plastics drop-off, all of them. Waste Options then sorts those, and you'll see pictures here of the sorting room. The point is that if they make it into your trash bags, they ultimately get landfilled. It's an important distinction. If it goes through as a recyclable drop-off material and it's not recyclable, it's sorted off, it's sent off island as a hard to or a bulky waste through a C&D operation. So the important distinction is all of your plastics should go through the drop-off and not into your trash. Moving on to commercial drop-off, so someone that's going over the scale. They're bringing us CRTs, they're bringing us mattresses, leaf and yard waste, mixed excavation, C&D, clean wood, steel, tires, metal, appliances, all kinds of electronics, and then, of course, the municipal solid waste and dewatered sludge from our wastewater treatment plant operations. So again, this is sort of a closed loop. It's helping us with other activities that are going on across the island. And the municipal solid waste, how is that any different from your bag trash that you drop off? It's not. We're protecting the public by having them drop it into a roll-off container at the residential drop-off. That is then picked up by Waste Options folks and added to the tipping floor, just like a commercial drop-off would, but without the traffic of pedestrians over there. So it's municipal solid waste is really nothing more than curbside picked up residential waste. It's also restaurant food waste. You know, the school. I think the school's waste as well. There's a lot, multiple streams that come together into that MSW. Landfill operations. We have the residuals from the MSW operation, and that is going into any residual that's being landfilled today is going into a lined cell. So we have 2A, 2B, which is active, and we have 3A coming soon. It's been under construction for a while, as I mentioned, in space that was created by mining out the old landfill. And then we have room to put a further cell at 3B if needed, or when needed. So unlined landfill mining, The old original landfill has been, if you're not aware, has been being mined. It's a unique thing here on the island. It's not going on very much, if at all, in Massachusetts. It's expensive, but it's unique here because we're not creating any new space. In fact, we're losing island from erosion. So as we create and continue to bring in solid waste at a larger volume than we have in the past, we need to manage that. And we're doing it by removing material from the old landfill and sorting it. So that a lot of that material has broken down and has, you're left with the residuals from the original trash, which are plastics and other things that haven't fully broken down or won't break down without hundreds of years of time, and largely sand. Sand was placed on top of the trash as daily cover for decades. So there's a lot of sand that's in that mound. So the screeners will remove ultimately around 70% of the total volume, and that is stockpiled in small piles, sampled under a regimen regulated by DEP, and as the results come back, if it's a clean pile, that means it doesn't have petrochemicals or any kind of VOC background, they stockpile. And that stockpiled reclaimed soils are piled up around the site. You'll see pictures of that coming. And those stockpiles are intended for use on site in the future. What are we going to use them for? It's ultimately material we will use to cap that reduced landfill. So it's going to ultimately save the town some money in that. Another requirement is to do gas and groundwater monitoring around the landfill. So we'll see spots where those tests are carried out. Those are done quarterly. Sampling's done here, and then those collected samples are sent off island for testing at a certified lab. Beyond that, we've been working with various folks, including Land Council, to develop I think, a robust nutrient sampling and testing program. This is elective. This is something the town has stepped up and said, you know what? It's important to us to know the answers as to whether the landfill operations in any of its makeup, whether it's compost or other, is the landfill having a negative effect on Long Pond from a nutrient standpoint? And if so, what can we do about it? So the first answer, or the first question to answer is it? And so we started this past 2017, I believe in September, working with our landfill monitoring consultant to expand our elective testing into nutrients. We've been working on that. Last year we did 3 samples. This year we're expanding to 6 samples. And in addition to that, we're going to start looking at not only understanding any concentrations of nutrients, but also what the loadings are to be able to inform some other decisions being made. And this comes back to when I first arrived a couple Aprils ago. There was a lot of discussion about the sewering of Nantucket. And at the time, material was published that said, well, the landfill's to blame for the nutrients in Long Pond. And there wasn't a lot of, you'll see with Cormac's presentation, wasn't a lot of hard data to back up that claim. So the point was, I recognized that, and we said, hey, we need that answer. We need that data. So it's important to us as a town to start to gather that data so that we can inform that decision, which isn't going away. And so as part of that too, we recognized that there was a well series. So typically they go in as two different wells, a deeper well and a shallow well for groundwater sampling and surface water sampling. There was a well series that was lost. No one could understand why there was a data gap in the groundwater monitoring program. So we've wrestled back and forth with Waste Options to get to the bottom of that. And ultimately we found that when the old radio tower was demolished out there on the public works site, apparently this series was damaged. Long story short is they're now been reestablished and back up online. We're taking samples from there again, which is good news. So our material comes in into the recycling facility, goes up a conveyor belt to a sorting room. This is an example of what goes on in the sorting room. So when your material goes down the chutes, gets collected, goes up the conveyor into this room. That's why it's important to help you create these bales of recyclable materials. The cleaner that your material comes in, the better they do at their job being able to sort the material by hand. The plastics, same thing. Make sure all your plastics are in there. They will sort off the plastics that are revenue generating versus the stuff that needs to go off island. So there's an example of what's going on. When we bale these, this is what they end up looking like. They compact them and bale them together for the commodity market. So back to our overall, we just reviewed the MRF building. We're moving on to the compost facility and the biofilter. Essentially, the tipping floor here is where the municipal solid waste gets dropped off. From there, it goes down this long digester, spinning tube, where it heats up to about 140, 145 degrees Fahrenheit. It takes about 4 days for the material, for the bags of trash to get through the whole thing. During that process, it's sort of steel ribs, similar to a cement truck or a concrete truck, where it's constantly mixing and breaking material up and starting that microbial breakdown. And so the temperature helps kill biological pathogens. And ultimately, the material that comes out is a real soupy mess. It's very, very wet. So it goes up a conveyor within the facility. It gets shaken and separated through a sorting machine. The wet compostable material drops out, and the stuff that is left in there bounces over the top. It's larger particles. It's stuff that could have been recyclable but was not. Plastics, largely. Some leftover steels that are in there. Stuff that should have been pulled out of the waste stream but was not. That gets screened off over the top, and that material gets baled. We'll see pictures of that later. The important part of that is to understand that the baled, I'll call them residuals from that compost program, is the only thing that makes it into the landfill. That's it. It's the only thing that's going into the landfill. So the important point there is the cleaner that we make our trash, which is the better that we participate in all of the available diversions, recycling or other. If the cleaner the trash, the less that we burden our landfill, the less we have a need for the landfill. And finally, the biofilter building here, which controls the odors. So yes, when you come on site, it may stink a little. Certainly, it's probably well, I don't know if it's the smelliest place on island, but it certainly has an odor to it. I can assure you that if the biofilter building was not operating, you wouldn't be able to handle it. I've been inside the composting facility under operation, and the biofilter is a negative pressure building, so it vacuums all the air out of the composter facility and filters it through a bunch of ground up wood waste. We'll see pictures of that. And that helps sort of create that filter that captures the odor. This is a breakdown of how that facility operates. Again, the tipping building takes in MSW and dewatered sludge from the wastewater treatment facility. The tipping floor rejects go back and get taken off as bulky waste and C&D. And then it starts the process. It goes through the digester, gets combined with air and water, goes through the trauma screen, and then gets screened again. It ultimately gets de-stoned and then makes it to the compost pad. Here's the facility from the outside. Here's the facility on the inside, the tipping floor. Generally, the MSW gets dumped here. the sludge from the wastewater treatment plant here, and they go through up this conveyor into the top of the digester. They make it down the digester, again, 3 or 4 days, reaching temperatures to kill off the pathogens. Then when it comes out the other end, comes up this conveyor, goes through this bouncing trommel screen, this bouncing screener here, and this is the beginnings of, this is the wet mess of compostable humus material, and then the residual material bounces off and gets baled here. These are the bales of residuals that ultimately make it to the top of the landfill. So this is it. That's it. And if you look in here, you're looking at plastics. You're looking at rags, but largely plastics. Plastics. So I think what we've been seeing historically is, well, this plastic doesn't seem recyclable to me. I don't see a number on it, and we've been trained to look for that number. I'm telling you that we need to combine all the plastics into the MRF building and get the plastics out of our landfill. So this is the compostable material in its wet form. It starts down on the lower end, and it gets there's an air floor that introduces air. The gravity just drains the water out of it, and if you've been out here, or if you ever come out, the floor is sloped. The water coming off of that is actually collected as leachate, and it's added into the head end of the digester to pre-wet the material as it gets introduced. And the material will then be turned and aerated as it makes it down the floor. So down at the end, it's dry and it's ready to make it outside. I should point out that once it gets down to the drier side, it makes it up to the other end of the building, and it goes through a final processing. It's shaken off, makes it up, and the destoner module in the back takes out any final large chunks, literal stones that make it in, or any kind of chunks of glass or plastics that made it through the original screen. That material then is brought out to the general composting area to start its life outside. You can see the windrows here of fresh material coming out of the compost site. Off to the right over here is a very large mound of collected leaf and yard waste that's been sitting there for years. That is now being brought out. You can see this is leaf and yard waste and brush that's ready to be chipped up, and some mixed excavation waste out in the back, or possibly some mulch, and then some mulch pile off to the side. So depending on the product that Waste Options is making, and we'll visit that down here in a little bit, depends on where it gets stored, how it gets stored, and how it's combined out in the field. Back here is the C&D building, construction and demolition debris, which, by the way, they actually recover wood, clean wood from this facility, chip it up, and it gets mixed in with wood chips for mulch and or added to construction of that topsoil material. Here's the biofilter I mentioned that's doing the air odor control for the compost material. This is a 5-foot mat of ground up green wood. So it does a really excellent job of keeping odors down. And then ultimately the air is able to exit through some filters through the roof. So this gets ground up and placed here, and has about an 18-month life cycle. 5 feet of wood chips start their process here, and once they've reached their life, this whole facility gets changed out. So this will actually go get combined with other wood chips and start their process as compost, or finish their life as compost. These are the residual bales. These are the MSW residual bales. The stuff that was screened off of the compost operation, the composter building operation. And this is the top of the landfill. So you'll see some familiar things, some cover of sand material, and this grayish material on the top is a material called posi shell. It's essentially a cementitious, almost like a gunite type material that gets sprayed on, and that is to control, as a daily cover, control any kind of a wind-blown, to prevent the wind from grabbing and snapping off and carrying away any of the material that's up here on the top of the landfill. It's a breakdown of landfill history and facts. So landfills, as I briefly described, used to be take your stuff to a unhospitable part of town, largely a wetland, throw it in the swamp, and it magically disappeared. And you do that long enough and it starts to build up and it doesn't disappear anymore. Meanwhile, all that stuff is subject to rain, and it's starting to, as that material degrades and break down and combine with other chemicals and such underground, the rain forces that stuff into the groundwater. A modern landfill, which is pictured here, is more like a bathtub. It's basically a plastic liner, and when I say plastic, it's basically a very, very thick plastic that acts as a bathtub. Material goes in. While the landfill is building up, that same weather is still subject to weather, so every time it rains, leachate off of that landfill has to be collected, taken to a treatment plant like it does here. It's taken off the line cells and trucked out to the wastewater treatment plant and introduced into the headworks of the plant and treated there. And then eventually, when the volume reaches its design life, that whole cell would be capped and monitored over its life, both monitored internally and externally to make sure that it's not leaching anything in the future. Okay, so this location has been underway, I'm told, around 1940. There's a bunch of other facts here. I want to get into a little bit of exchange. We're going to rein it back in for a little bit and then finish up the presentation, but I want to get a little bit of interaction here, about a half hour in, to talk about the landfill mining operations and the future of this facility as we are approaching some milestone dates here that require some action on behalf of the town. So landfill mining, again, has been going on around 2009 or just before that, but we have a cap on that. We are, right now, we talked about creating the space, but DEP has allowed us to amend the original contract that was signed in 1999 8 times. In those 8 different amendments, they've allowed different things to occur, mostly having to do with landfill mining. So the mining was originally planned to just reduce the volume, and then eventually it was to create space for lined construction cells, the line cell construction. And so here we are, we have 2 line cells, a third one under construction, and the ability to construct an extension off of that third one. And so what are we going to do next? Are we going to continue to mine? We have permission and authority to mine for another year, and that's it. Our permit says as soon as the mining ends, we're supposed to immediately go into capping of the original landfill. What is that going to look like? How much is that going to cost? Right now, we're looking at least $10 million to cap that original landfill. And that may come down, may go up, but it may come down based on the amount of materials that we've collected through the mining process to be able to cover over that before the plastic liners go down and that sort of thing. There's been lots of discussion about what does that look like? Do we shape the existing landfill to make sure that the south-facing face of it is suitable for solar reuse, as we've seen with lots of facilities around the state and around the country? And so how much effort is that going to take? Do we want to continue mining? A lot of folks out there have reached out and said, we want the entire landfill gone. You know, make it go away. Continue to mine until it's gone. Maybe we want to reuse that site for something else down the road. Or maybe we want to just move into capping it. So, or somewhere in between. For the lined landfill cells, again, 2A is inactive, but it is not yet capped. So it's still exposed. Every time it rains, it creates some level of runoff, leachate that's collected. 2B is active. That's the picture we showed earlier where material coming off the residual from the compost facility is collected. So that is subject to rain as well and collected as leachate. 3A is under construction, should be opening soon. That will be a place that we will house residuals for the foreseeable future until the capacity is reached there, and then potential expansion from 3A to 3B to the rear of that. And that's it. That's all we have for space. We could forecast certainly how long is this going to last. What do we do after this? These are all questions that are being asked and hopefully answered in the next 12 months. We're looking for input on all these questions in the future. What do you want for the island? What do you foresee for the next generations that would be beneficial here? We are looking at waste options contract that ends in 2025. So what happens after that? Are we going to bring in another vendor? Are we going to try to run this ourselves as a town? We're going to create some kind of partnership, from on-island vendors and some off-island folks bringing in new technology. We're open to discussions. Right now, we're pulling together a request, a sort of a request for proposals type of effort that would open up these discussions to people in the business to say, hey, do you have a proven technology that would work in this environment? And if so, would you be willing to come here to Nantucket to make this happen? So there's lots of discussions happening right now that we really have to take a look at, and we want input from you. So we do have a lot more to talk about. I'm not going to bore you with this other slides I have with regulations. We have all kinds of slides that if questions go down certain paths, I should be able to jump to. But one thing I would like to do is get some, we could stop for probably 10 minutes and just get some question and answers back and forth with regard to what you would like to see for the future. If you have any specific questions in that regard.
If you have any questions, just step up to one of the mics on the side and state your name and tell us what your question is.
Hi, Mary Longacre. Thank you, Rob, for that presentation. I try and keep up with recycling technology, and I learned stuff that I didn't know, especially about putting all the plastics in, so I really appreciate that.
Sure.
I wondered if we have anything like a public education program in the works, especially since we've now changed how we're handling some of the recyclable materials, to help people do the right thing. And then can we also work on diverting more material so that it doesn't end up at the landfill, whether that's something like architectural salvage or expanding the take it or leave it, or increasing the recycling that we do, or just reducing material use before it gets to the dump. So anything that we can do to divert materials out of that waste stream would be great. Can you talk about that and the public education, please?
Yes, thank you. So I'm very excited. The end of this month, actually, the island will have its first recycling solid waste coordinator. the town has just hired, her name is Graham Durovich. And Graham is very excited, and she's already a part of the clean team. I would tell you that one of the tasks that she'll be undertaking in a meaningful way will be public education. That said, there's other groups that are already taking the bull by the horns. There's a group of puppeteers called Out to Sea that appear on public access that are developing a video now in concert with Public Works and with Waste Options to educate children about what's going on over at our landfill and what they could be doing to help not just what happens when they get here, but as you mentioned, diverting before you even get here, reusing, of course, recycling thereafter. So that, take it or leave it, is sort of kind of has been left in the lurch of the most recent discussions and improvements. But I can assure you that take it or leave it is definitely going to get a makeover. We're looking at all kinds of different potential operations there, including expansion. Probably an exclusive parking lot beyond the fence that's exclusive to that facility, so the users would be outside of the main parking lot to sort of minimize the interaction between the residential drop-off folks and the take it or leave it facility. And we have a long way to go there. People wouldn't believe me, and I don't have pictures of it, but we're working hard to develop, well, we'll be working hard this fall with our recycling coordinator to actually develop a off-island textile recycler that's going to take all of those clothes. If you've ever been in Take It or Leave It, the mountain of textiles that comes in every week will astound you. Beyond that, the books and really everything else associated with that site. And literally every week, Public Works empties that facility into a roll-off container that becomes construction demolition debris. It's a shame. It really is a shame. So there's some low-hanging fruit that are right there that will be attended to, but we need to take, we needed to take priority steps, and more having to do with plastics and cardboard. So beyond that, I think we'll intend on doing more outreach, whether it's developing videos, outreach to schools and other folks like Civic League to get those messages out. At the same time, we have a concept to do sort of a stationary educational opportunity at the residential drop-off area that would include sort of a model of what the lined landfill cell looks like and what are the different components of it, just so people can visualize really what's going on up there. Same thing, we're potentially working together with Waste Options to develop tours. I know when people I've had a few groups over the past year who've come to me and have been begging just to what's going on out there, and I've taken tours. And I can tell you, people love that stuff. They really eat it up, and it helps really educate people. So I think there's definitely some opportunity for more videos to let people know what's going on.
Great. Thank you. I'm really excited that this is going to be less of a black hole in many ways. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Bijan Sabat, resident 79 Eel Point Road, Nantucket. Great presentation. Thanks, Rob, very much. I just had one question, one quick follow-up. Is there any effort, you think, by the town to restrict, plastics on island in a way, like you see it with straws now? There's limitations on materials. Do you see other things that the town could be doing? Restaurants, grocery stores, residents, whatever, just from a volume of plastics just coming onto the island before it becomes trash. So that's like one question. The other one is, and this just is very anecdotal, but in the years we've been coming here, it feels like this year the odor is more palpable, but it may just be, our experience and our neighbors' experience. But I don't know if that's anecdotal and that's not real, or or it's consistent with what you're hearing elsewhere?
So I'll start with the odor one first. I would say that the odors tend to carry better in humid conditions, and I would say certainly it's been more humid than I'm used to here.
Yeah.
So I would guess that it's probably real, but it's more conditional based on the weather. The first part of that was, remind me, sir.
Just restricting.
Restricting plastic. So there's obviously a tremendous push here on island to go after plastics, whether it's the Stop the Straw campaigns or the I don't know if it's a regulation or the bylaw, Board of Health regulation that talks about the single-use plastics for packaging. So, but reality is people are taking cases of, for instance, plastic water bottles.
Water bottles, right.
When they come here over on the boat. I don't think we're going to be able to stop that. You know, that's a lot of sort of getting into rights that we have as Americans. But beyond that, there's lots we can do to do, for instance, like roadside trash. You know, I'm not going to get onto roadside trash, but we could do a lot to help minimize or eliminate that. But as far as the sheer volume of stuff that's coming here, I think it's frankly more of a societal thing. You know, you see massive fluctuations in, say, cardboard when the economy's good because people are buying crap. They're just, you know, they're buying stuff. And so it's, the thing is, this stuff kind of comes and goes, and we need to change behaviors. Very difficult to just change behaviors. And in fact, from things I've read, particularly folks that are on vacation, usually they're not behaving the same that they do when they're not on vacation. And you may just reflect on that for a moment. You know, what do you do yourself differently when you're on vacation that you don't normally do every day? And so those are some of the challenges, the real challenges, particularly in the peak season when we're bringing in the majority of the material. I mean, in a 3-month cycle, we're bringing in at or more volume than we are for the rest of the year. Yeah. So while most islanders will tell you, well, we're doing this, X, Y, Z to be the most green people on the planet, and I'm not doubting them. I'm sure they are. That's fantastic. It's great education for their kids as well, and leading by example. I love it. But it doesn't get away from what happens when we have a massive influx. We have to deal with it, and so making those opportunities and the streams easy to understand, whether it's educating, putting information out on the boats, or through real estate folks to educate their clients coming in to rent. There's lots of opportunity to do outreach.
Good. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
I think there's also opportunity for regulation as well, is that we were able to mandate that all trash bags are transparent. We can easily mandate that all trash bags sold through the commercial vendors are biodegradable. The problem the last time we looked was that those products weren't available in terms of them being sufficient for their need, for what they're used for. They would break down in the trash bin. They would rip when you pulled them out. They just weren't there in terms of the technology. Maybe they are by now. The last time we looked was about 8+ years ago. So they might have improved by now, but I think that's definitely one of the possibilities, because if, as Rob pointed out, in those residual sort of bales, most of that is just plastics, and most of that plastics in terms of the lighter stuff is just trash bags. So if we can at least tackle that, that'd be a good start. But again, I think it starts with that technology. Yeah.
I'm going to jump in before this next question comes. So we had some questions that were submitted to the Civic League for answering. And this one is applicable, so I just want to share it. It says, what happens to the plastic material that is supposedly compostable, but it advises on the packaging that it's only compostable at a commercial composting facility? So it's kind of a two-parter for me. It's sort of, we have regulations now that say these packagings have to be compostable. But we don't even know if our facility is able to properly compost them. And it's quite likely with a 3 or 4 day cycle through the digester that this material might not break down. So the point there is not we shouldn't have regulations. It's let's make sure when we do make regulations that are well intended to reduce or eliminate these streams of plastics to make sure that they don't end up in the oceans or in our landfill where we have limited space. Let's make sure that the equipment that we actually are using solves the problem or answers that regulation. So, you know, it's certainly something that we're going to continue to work on, but I just wanted to raise that point at the same time. It's not as simple as signing a document saying, you know, it's done, no more plastics, it's a regulation. You can talk to the people that try to enforce it. It's a challenge.
Yeah, we definitely would have to do a series of tests to see if those types of products could get biodegraded through the digester. It's 145 average over 4 days, but we did various tests in situ in the labs for invasive species seeds to sort of mimic them going through the biodigester. And that was one way we were able to prove to ourselves that we could put invasive species seeds into the digester and we're fine with it going through the compost. But as Rob pointed out, you wouldn't want to just write it and say it's a regulation, we're good, because we do want to test all these products to make sure that they do break down.
Go ahead, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your presentation. I'm John Emmert, a summer resident. I recall, and my facts may be wrong, that there was a fire a couple of years ago which destroyed the construction waste building, as well as some pieces of heavy equipment. Also, there was an unfortunate person who was killed on the facility. Are there safety issues that you have addressed to make it safer for both the employees and the users, or things that you need to do still?
Excellent question. So I'll start by saying my tenure here has been about a year and a half. So while I am aware of not only a fatality in the C&D building, is also a fire. They predate my time here, so I can't speak to the specifics of those events, other than to say I believe at the time of the fatality, it was fairly common practice to have people people from the public in the building sort of picking through the materials as this large heavy equipment was operating. That clearly is not happening any longer. So certainly changes have happened where the public, as you've seen with the residential drop-off, separated from the commercial tipping floor drop-off, they're separated for a reason, to avoid interactions between heavy equipment and pedestrians or users from the residents. So, but safety is always a concern. Certainly, the fire at the I don't know the particulars, but with that kind of dry, dusty material, it's not uncommon to have fires. However, it's about managing them. Not managing the fire, managing the products, spraying them down, or making sure you're policing what's coming in. Oftentimes, fires can occur with trash material. There was a fire yesterday with spontaneous combustion of ill collected rags from a painting or staining operation at a single-family house. So it's about what's coming in. Some people would dispose of coals, for instance, from a barbecue, and those will end up in the waste stream. And I've seen off-island, trash trucks driving down the highway that are on fire because these smoldering ash piles will set the trash contents on fire. So it's about good management, really. It's about having procedures in place to make sure that materials are either sprayed down or managed coming in, so you don't have those incidents. Beyond that, I have initiated safety through not just this side of the complex, but on the DPW side as well, having audits from outside vendors that come in, and they'll go through the building looking for individual items, as well as looking at procedures to make sure that our folks are properly equipped with safety equipment, as well as following safe procedures to avoid injury.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your time for being here and trying to inform the public on this important subject. My name is Louis Bassano, and I reside at 3 Lyford Road. I was delighted to hear that you're looking at a lot of different options, inviting other companies to take a look at our situation and come up with some ideas on how we would handle our solid waste. From my point of view, I would like us to take a good hard look at high temperature incineration and possibly then tying that into resource recovery, where we can generate some electricity and put that into the system. One of the issues that came back several years ago when we took a look at that was that we didn't generate enough garbage to generate some electricity. If we can't do that, I still would like us to take a look at high temperature incineration. Our waste is not commercial waste with a lot of heavy metals. It's mostly household waste. And I think that if we can get a commitment from the DEP, if we give them targets that we have to hit, as long as they guarantee they're not going to change their rules and regulations for a period of time, that we can maybe move in that direction. And I'd like to get some comment from you on that.
Sure. First of all, thank you for coming, and thanks for participating in this. I would say we are definitely going to be looking at all available technologies, proven or otherwise, to really take a look at this. There's been lots of discussion regarding incineration as well as pyrolysis to take a look at conversion of plastics into biodiesel. So with regard to the incineration or just creation of electricity, one of the challenges, whether it's incineration to electricity, waste energy, or even just simple solar generation, is the limitation of our electrical infrastructure that runs from our campus into the grid. So while those things will be looked at vigorously, we recognize that we do not have a specific circuit to tap that comes right past our site, and a very costly upgrade to the electrical infrastructure would need to occur to be able to take on any of these electrical generating opportunities.
Again, I do thank you for today's forum, and I would just encourage you to keep taking a look at all the different options that are out there. Modern technology will continue to change, and I think that this is an area that there's still a ways to go, that we can make a lot of improvements. And again, thank you for allowing us to participate.
Sure.
Hi, Cliff Williams. Unlike a lot of other facilities we have, where we have a 5, 10, 15-year, 20-year program, it seems like, and maybe it's safe to say, that it's the opposite with the landfill, where maybe the farther we go out, the less knowledge we have, or the less planning we have.
I appreciate that, Cliff. So we will be looking at the term of the next contract as well to understand that a little bit better. The point's well taken. You know, at what point does it make sense to have a long enough term to attract competition and attract vendors that are interested in coming here for the numbers to work. At the same time, Are you, relying on technology that is going to be, something that's no longer or be replaced in 10 years and have to do some kind of major capital investment out past that 10-year period? The time frame is certainly something we're going to pay attention to.
So I guess what I'm trying to get down to is the clock is ticking then. It's not like we have options. I mean, we talked about the landfill. There's only so much space. There's only so many years. So I just think this is a great presentation. It's probably the biggest presentation I've ever seen on the landfill. So, but I don't think the landfill's been an urgency as much as everything else has been in this town. Maybe we can put it more in the forefront of, we only have so much time, and there has to be some decisions made because we're running out of time, we're running out of space, and we're probably running out of options. Do you agree?
Well, I would say that there's been, from my perspective, I've been talking about the landfill, even this specific landfill, even before I started. It was discussed even in my interview. So it's been the focus of management and the select board for a year and a half plus. And I know obviously it's been discussed through the various contract adjustments and amendments to the DEP ACOs through the years. So I don't think it's ever been out of the focus of town government, maybe just not a focus of public participation at every walk. So I would say to that, time is of the essence, certainly based on the statutory limitations we have. We literally have a year to mine, and once we're done, we're expected to commence capping of the original landfill. So if we want to do something different, which may be bringing in some new technology, that could allow us to justify, for instance, continuing the mining to make room to construct this new technology, whether it's an incinerator or something else to come in and fill that space. So I don't think that we're ready to say we're done here and we're just going to move towards capping. But we really want to hear from folks to understand island-wide, what do people expect out of this facility for the next 25 years, whether or not that contract is for 25 or 10 or 15 or 30. And there's a lot going on off island. There's recycling folks that are stockpiling, for instance, paper. Paper is not being taken by China any longer because of new regulations there. So it is stockpiled and stockpiled and stockpiled at these facilities waiting for a solution. Luckily, and strange to me, coming from off island, paper is allowed to go in the trash here. It is exclusively not allowed in the trash off island. It's separated and it's separated because the commodity markets existed, but it's here it's able to be composted, which is very unique to most commercial operations off island. There's a lot of incinerators that are out there, but paper is not allowed in that trash stream. So here we're handling it just like we handle a lot of stuff being out here on our own. Being able to handle it goes a long way. I think part of this whole discussion is how do we manage the compost that we create and what's in it. A lot of people will go to, again, I'm using some off-island examples, but they'll drive up to Home Depot, throw a bunch of bags of compost, mulch, topsoil, whatever product you want to name, throw it in their vehicle and take it home and apply it. And not even think twice about what's in it. Do they have concerns about any kind of chemicals or other? Here, because we're so in tune, I think, and we're paying attention to what's coming out of the composter that we're throwing this municipal solid waste into, we are asking those hard questions. What the heck's in that compost? What are you testing for? So those answers are out there. We're working with Waste Options to develop regular reports so that that information is available. So when you go and come pick up compost, topsoil, or mulch, you know what you're taking away. In fact, Waste Options is moving forward. They've really, since I've been here, the product that's been produced with the investment of time and a tremendous expense on equipment with the new trommel screens, bringing the screener down to 3/8 inch, removing glass and plastic from that topsoil material that's been created from a year and a half ago to today is night and day difference in the products that they're producing. They're moving forward with looking to get certified organic with the leaf and yard waste topsoil that's being created. So there's some really amazing steps being made with the intent on being able to turn that stuff back to you folks. You brought it in, now take it away and use it again somewhere on your property, you know, and do so with confidence. That's the goal.
And Cliff, I think this is why these forums are so important, because I agree. I've been here for 18 years now, and there really hasn't been that many forums as it relates to the operations of the landfill. So it's really good to get this check-in and update. I learned a bunch just now as well. And I think it behooves everybody to continue the public participation through the Civic League, through just individuals. You got a selectman sitting right in front of you. You could pester him a little bit more in terms of that long-range strategic planning. Unfortunately, as you know, a lot of the discussions as it relates to waste options and the landfill has been done in a vacuum in executive session. And that's nobody's fault. It's just sometimes that relationship has been somewhat contentious where those discussions have had to be in executive session. So I think if we separate those discussions from the long-term strategic planning into the future in the next 1, 3, 5 years will be very important with the public participation and the request of Rob to get those new technologies on the board.
David Madigan, appreciate you taking the time to present to us. I'm focused on this decision that needs to be made in a 12-month time frame, which seems like a very short period of time, whether or not to cap the landfill. I just wanted to understand better what exactly does that mean. So if the decision is made to stop mining and to cap the landfill, then the lined portion is all that's available, and then the unlined portion sort of goes offline, and then how do we function going forward in that scenario?
Sure. So the unlined portion, just to be clear, the unlined portion is not being used currently. It's just open. Generally around the state, any unlined landfill has already been capped. So what that does is prevents stormwater from continuing to leach material out into the environment.
I see. Even the municipal solid waste, I thought you had a picture of. So that's on lined landfill that they're being deposited?
Yes. So the residuals that are being deposited into the landfill today are on lined cells. Okay. So the only thing that we're talking about in the very short term is, do we stop mining and go to capping the old unlined landfill, which we are not, it's not active, it's just uncapped.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Rob, good afternoon. Tim Savarino. Thanks very much, all of you, for the presentation. As one citizen, I would encourage you to keep mining. I would encourage you to keep mining because that lowers the cost to the taxpayer of capping. When the town started this endeavor, there were 44 acres of landfill that were reduced to 20. So simple math, that tells you you've cut your capping costs in half. So if we can continue to mine, that'll reduce the cost to the taxpayers further, and at the same time clean up many years of sin there. So I would encourage you as one citizen to keep pushing for the mining. I know that DEP wanted us to kind of prove we could walk before we ran, and I think we've done that as a town. And under your leadership, I think we can continue to do that.
The other thing I think would be important to say is the facility is 100 ton, as you mentioned, Robert, it's a 100 ton a day facility. And the reason for that, it was designed for those volumes because of what we experience in June, July, and August, September. In the off season, our tonnage goes way down as a community. And the reason, again, I would encourage the mining is because the tonnage falls from 100 to something less than 20. All that capacity is there for us to be running the mining through the landfill. So again, I would urge you as a citizen to keep mining. And the other thing I would like, as a question, Robert, the other thing I would like to have you speak to, if you would, is what a success story the composting and recycling program is in Nantucket compared to other communities. I think that's one of the things the town has missed an opportunity to talk about. I've heard numbers in excess of 80%, and we should be really proud of that as a community. I know when I look at my children and my grandchildren, they think nothing now of recycling, which in the old days it was the soda can went in the trash. So we've actually changed the culture to some degree, and I think we should be very proud of that. So could you speak to that? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Tim. You make a great point. I think the next generation is always the ones that are leading the charge here when it comes to doing the right thing, as long as they're educated properly. So in that case, I learned how to recycle from my kids, frankly, and so I don't think they ever knew how much of a militant recycling I would become. To make sure I reinforce the messages that they taught me. But it is important to continue to teach those kids. And so back to, you made a point about sort of tooting our own horn about how excellent the island's recycling percentages are. And so before we do that, I think we really need to know those hard numbers. And we have lots of numbers to siphon through. Again, one of the goals of signing up our recycling coordinator is to be able to drill into those numbers in a meaningful way. I mean, I give updates to the board periodically about the revenues, the expenses, and the materials coming in, but we don't focus on let's say, how well we're doing, or as a community and or as a visiting community during the summer months. And rest assured, that's definitely right there in the middle burner, not the back burner, and hasn't been the front burner just from other things that we've been working on, other priorities that have been in front of us. So in the coming years, we will be measuring very regularly, even on a monthly basis, of where we stand. And it's only with that upfront information and regular education that we are really going to change behaviors and have something that we are all very proud of. That said, we're starting to work with some WPI students this fall with our recycling coordinator and DPW staff to do the town's first trash sort. So if you don't mind the odor and are interested in getting involved with something pretty fantastic, it's a dirty job, but it's fun. Basically creating a table of chicken wire about the size of this table here. We'll have a bunch of people standing around it. We're going to take a sample of the trash as it comes in, set it aside, and ultimately open all the bags, go through and sort every shred of trash in those bags to find out what's there. And that is the sort of start to say, as a community, we're finding this, and this in our trash, in our waste stream, and we want to use that as a sort of a eye-opener to shine the light on what's actually happening, not what we feel like we're doing, what we're saying we're doing, but what's actually happening. And use that as an opportunity to educate. Plan on putting that onto cable access to let people know what's really happening out there. And do that on a periodic basis to sort of check back in and again, use it as a tool to say it's lining up with the real larger data points that we have or not. And maybe the sample data that we're getting needs to be taken differently to make sure that it's accurate. But there's lots going on behind the scene. I hope that these sort of things will roll out over the coming years, and you'll see some meaningful change.
Switch over? You good?
Yes. While we're switching over, I want to, there's a few other questions that came up. Two more that I have here that I wanted to make sure we answered that came into the Civic League. Three others that I had already answered. This one is, if the mining of the unlined cell is to stop next year before it is finished, what is the plan for completing the process, and when will a system to capture stormwater runoff be installed at the unlined cell location? So this one is not as clear, or at least there's pieces to this that I'm not sure if they ever were intended. But I've mentioned that the mining of the unlined cell is permitted to continue for this year. Once it's done, the idea would be to move into capping, as we talked about. Capping would require us to develop a surface runoff plan that would swale and direct the stormwater off the cap in channels and swales down to a detention basin sort of collection site, and ultimately be able to filter and recharge the groundwater with clean runoff from a grassed finished surface. Beyond that, we're going to be talking a little bit about stormwater runoff. At least twice this past year, the C&D facility in the rear of the lot and the compost and leaf and yard waste drop-off areas have been closed because of flooding. You might have been out there on one of these days, and besides being a major inconvenience to you, this is something that we are seeing now, whether it's a combination of a limited facility design from when it was originally designed, or a combination of that and limited maintenance to these basins. We don't know. And we're working through with Land Council and with Waste Options to really take a meaningful look at the stormwater collection facilities and to be able to redesign them to handle what's expected of those facilities moving forward. And finally, how is the cake? And the cake, we're talking about the cake from the sewer plant. It's the dewatered sludge from that sewer plant. How is that now being processed, and what is being done to clean up the past practice of allowing it to leach into the groundwater? I'm not aware of any time in the past that dewatered cake, dewatered sludge from the sewer plant has ever been allowed to leach into the groundwater. It is dewatered mechanically at the wastewater treatment plant, and when it's dewatered, it still is pretty gelatinous. It comes to us delivered by truck very frequently, and ultimately delivered to the tip floor. Tip floor is concrete. It's sealed up. There's no drains from that area. So all that material gets delivered up to the composter and goes from there. So there is no sludge cake that's leaching into the groundwater. I think this person might have been thinking about finished compost or curing compost that is created from the sludge and the MSW that is then allowed to stockpile out in the curing area on the ground, and ultimately which is right now the unanswered question of what kind of potential nutrient impacts might be occurring to the adjacent wetland and Long Pond. So with that.
Great, thanks, Rob. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cormac Collier. I'm the Executive Director for the Nantucket Land Council. Many of you know who we are. We're an environmental group on the island. We work hand in hand with the town on various environmental issues, provide policy guidance to the town. We also do a number of other things as it relates to open space protection, research, and education. And I just wanted to take this opportunity as an aside to thank the Civic League. Completely off topic, but thank the Civic League for their perseverance in the recently won Boy Scout case. We partnered with the Civic League and the Nantucket Camp Richards Campers Association for over 5 years, and we persevered a very devious land grab from the Off-Island Cape and Islands Council. We were able to enforce the Civic League's reverter clause through the courts, and we were also able to gain local control, which was one of the most important things. And over the next year, over the next sort of slow months, we'll be working on a conservation restriction with the Civic League and the now true owners of the property, the Camp Richards Campers Association. So thank you. I'm going to be fairly brief. I think it's probably best if I just sort of go through these slides fairly expeditiously and then see what questions you have left over. But I think Rob gave a really good foundation in terms of the existing operations. But not only that, where are we going to go in the future regarding strategic planning? The Land Council's involvement in the landfill has traditionally just been as it relates to potential impacts relating to natural resources. And really, truly, what we've focused on is groundwater impacts and how those potential groundwater impacts would then affect the freshwater and the marine water resources. We have a really nice photo of Long Pond from Massasoit Bridge looking north. I didn't have a nice photo of the land bank the landfill in the background. I wanted to include that too, though. Just some discussion points of what I'll be discussing today. So, why we are concerned about the landfill, how it fits into the Nantucket Harbor watershed, and how it fits in with the other pollutants that are in that watershed. What's the guiding document that the town uses in terms of cleaning up the watershed? And what's that guiding document in terms of its recommended total maximum daily load for nutrients as well, specifically nitrogen? Just touch briefly upon the expanded water quality sampling that Rob had already mentioned and how those implications are going to fit into some better numbers that we're going to have. Revising some model runs, I'll go into that detail, and then just some next steps that the Land Council is now focusing on, specifically on site as it relates to stormwater management. So there's a nice little sunset photo of our recycling facility and the landfill entrance, but this is really what we're talking about is the facility itself, as Rob mentioned, and its close proximity to the wetlands. I think in some of those photos that Rob had, it noted the wetlands, but the existing wetland line is essentially right here in terms of a vegetated wetland south, and then you have the freshwater brackish resource of Long Pond right there with some other wetlands interspersed in between. How does it fit in? Why are we concerned about the landfill? Well, we're concerned because it's really smack dab in the headwaters of the watershed. Everything that happens in the watershed in terms of land uses, in one way or another, it gets transported to groundwater, whether it's through fertilizer, extra fertilizer, whether it's through septic systems, as we know, whether it's through atmospheric deposition, rainwater either hitting the ground itself and then entering the groundwater, or rainwater hitting directly the water surface as well. And this is somewhat of a unique watershed area in terms of controlling nutrients relating to other watersheds, is that we have a point source contribution in the landfill. There's pros and cons of having a point source. A point source is a lot easier sometimes, depending on the point source, to control. It's not region-wide. But the con, obviously, is just trying to deal with a landfill of this nature as well. So the Massachusetts Esterase Report. This is a report that the town entered into, an agreement that the town entered into with the State Department of Environmental Protection, stating that they were going to try to meet the total maximum daily load numbers that the that was decided upon through the report. We have a TMDL for Nantucket Harbor, a TMDL for Matticat Harbor, and a TMDL for Sakatcha. And then we have a TMDL for Hummock, but it's not through a regulated, enforceable. It's enforceable, but it's not necessarily as strongly regulated as the other three. I think that's the easiest way to say that for Hummock. Major contributions as a whole is, and whether you like the numbers or not, these are always debatable, these numbers. I didn't bring up this slide to debate the numbers. I more brought up the slide just to show you what the inputs are to the harbor watershed. Large percentage is essentially just the nitrogen hitting the water surface and then also being recycled in the sediments themselves. 54% of the overall load. You have wastewater in this pie piece right here, and then yellow is the landfill. 5% from natural surfaces going down to fertilizer and some other impervious surfaces. But what we really want to focus on is the local control load. What can we actually control? Where can we focus all of our efforts to control? And it goes into the question of really, should we be sewering the area? Should we be doing more for landfill? And should we be doing more on the fertilizer end? And then even doing some best management practices for the impervious surfaces at 10%. That's where the debate comes in, to be quite frank, is that there's some people that think we should do more on the landfill end versus more people think that we should be doing some on the septic system end. We approach it that we should be doing both on both ends. Obviously, there's a fiscal issue coming in, and we want to put our dollars to the best possible places. But when it comes to the landfill and through septic systems, what we want to do is really look at how they derive those numbers. There was some confusion in terms of how they derived the load of the landfill, and they actually had used guesstimates, I guess we'll say. They didn't have existing data in terms of adequate, they being UMass Boston, UMass Dartmouth, who created the report. They didn't have existing sufficient data in terms of having total nitrogen numbers for all the landfill wells. Thus, that's why we expanded those numbers recently. But what they used in 2007 to 2011 when they were creating the report is an estimate of other loads from other similar landfills. And there was definitely some cause for concern for that when the discussion of the sewer extensions came along, and perhaps we should look at those numbers as a town a little bit more. Definitely agree with that. That's a great idea. Thus, the impetus for doing expanded water quality sampling at the landfill, and then also creating a nitrogen loading calculation to the best extent that we can with exact data, I guess you could say. Existing town sampling water quality stations, and again, we always want to highlight this. The town does a lot of sampling, and their reports are now very easily accessible through this website right here. So if you're interested in any of the water quality sampling on any of the great ponds that the town does or the harbors, it is available right here. Also, the island-wide sampling report that is done annually, that is available on this website as well. They sample in a number of stations, 6 stations, from outside of Eel Point to near Warren's Landing, past Jackson Point, Hither Creek, and then a couple in the Long Pond area, one right by the ditch by Second Bridge, and then another by Massasoit Bridge Road. Certainly would be helpful if we could get some additional data, perhaps something in the North Pond area, and then, I'm sorry, Rob, be blinding you, and then south of Massasoit Bridge Road. Potentially, if there's time and personnel available, either through a private or public partnership, we could maybe do some additional sampling out there with the town. As a nutshell, I'm going to just be really sort of broad on this. Water quality in the harbor, excellent, very good. Once you start creeping into Jackson Point and Hither Creek, this is where it is very degraded and does not meet our TMDL. So that's why the town is doing their best to identify those loads and to properly plan and mitigate those loads as well. whether it's through septic system changes or changes at the landfill of what we're talking today. Long Pond is slowly improving. There's no official TMDL for Long Pond, but the water quality data through the past 3 to 5 years has indicated that there has been some improvements. This was one of Rob's just last samples, and I just wanted to mention just quickly the sampling stations that have been going on right here. These are all the sampling stations, well sampling stations, and there's some surface water sampling that they do as well through the town's consultant. But the reason why I picked up this side is note, these are groundwater contours. So approximately right at this area, groundwater is estimated at 2.5 feet below the surface. That's why we're so concerned about potential contaminants and potential pollutants in this area, because it's really not that far of a trip once you're getting down to once you get down to groundwater.
I just want to jump in and add to that.
Yeah.
The water company reported this past spring the highest groundwater on island ever recorded. There's been a lot of discussion about groundwater in basements that have never been there before. We believe that this is being influenced by not just weather patterns, but also sea level rise. And we expect to see groundwater levels continue to drive higher.
Yeah, and that leads into our last few slides that I have in terms of stormwater management. As you know, we're seeing these so-called 100-year storms on a much more frequent basis. The stormwater systems that have been put in place through the years, through the permitting agencies, they've really been designed for well below concurrent 100-year storms. And I think in the future, some of that planning, and they're already talking about it in terms of planning for some of these storms. So next steps of what we're going to be seeing as it relates to the landfill, and really pinpointing as best as we can what that loading number is, that nitrogen loading number is. So the town has entered into, or is about to enter into, a contract to incorporate new estimated nitrogen loading numbers from the dump into the model that was created for the total maximum daily load, so that they can actually get a better idea of what that what that contribution amount is. Secondly, they're going to do a few new model runs to determine how to meet the TMDL. What the citizens and the town came to realization that maybe perhaps we should look at other tools in the toolbox to really look and see how we can meet those TMDLs without jumping directly to sewer. We still might have to sewer, but let's look at the first few steps and tools first beforehand. Some of those tools would be to look at alternative innovative septic systems throughout the entire watershed area, perhaps throughout the entire watershed area of just, let's say, west of Nantucket Road, portions of the area. There's ways that they can do that and determine if that brings down that loading calculation. Secondly, one thing that is on the potential books is that there may be some dredging of Hither Creek, and I say maybe. I don't have any conclusive proof from Nantucket Marine, but I do know that they do want to dredge Hither Creek for navigation purposes. Now, what the dredging will also do will assist in the circulation patterns and allow better flow of clean salt water to get up into Hither Creek. Also allow more circulation and more flushing of the Hither Creek area. So that might improve water quality in that Hither Creek area as well. Third, the town is potentially exploring a shellfish reef creation similar to the one that they've done at Shimo Point. And perhaps that might have some additional water quality improvement as well. What the Land Council would like to do, concurrent with all of the work that's being done in terms of looking at watershed issues and large-scale nutrient loading issues, we'd like to direct our attention and direct our focus to bites at the apple that are potentially manageable. And that would be looking at stormwater management on site. The stormwater management of the site itself, it really was designed merely to look at flooding. It wasn't to look at any bioretention of nutrients or pollutants. It had some significant swales that were built. This is where you come in to the area to drop off your waste. This is where the landscapers come back and drop off their vegetated waste as well. This entire area from about here going down leads into a swale down to all the way down to right here. There's also a swale right here, a wet swale, and then this entire area right here, actually I'm going to zoom in. This is the BACS facility, constantly used, constantly moving. The groundwater surface flow is from a south to north, generally a south to north, which goes into this swale here, into this swale, out to this swale, and it's not even a swale, it's more like a retention basin, and then goes out to the wetland itself. Also, unfortunately, it's not just going out into a vegetated wetland, it's our understanding that these are connected to groundwater. So they're directly connected to groundwater, which goes down underneath any vegetation and then out into the Long Pond area as well. There's also a little system to the west as well that has a retention basin as it relates to some of the new activity that's out here. What we'd like to do is try and incorporate some best management practices out there that not only look at flooding as it relates to some of these larger 100-year storms, but also incorporate some technology, which is fairly basic, that would allow for plant uptake of nutrients, of pollutants, would allow microorganisms and plants to uptake some of the heavy metals, break down some of the hydrocarbons through the microorganism aspect. This is a fairly basic swale that's created in a parking lot. These are the things that can be incorporated quite easily if they're planned out right. We actually have a couple in the parking lot right out the door as well. They're not necessarily channeled like this. It's more sheet runoff going in. You know, have you been to the new school, the new elementary school? There's a very large area, circular area where the roundabout is. That actually should all be planted, but that's a bioswale. All the water is directed to there. There is some nutrient removal because there's a nice layer of organic soil that's removing it through microorganisms and recycling a little, but it really should be planted out very heavily like this. Has anybody been off island once you get off the steamship, and if you're trying to run to the Thrifty over at the High Line, well, you take this back path off Pleasant Street, and it's this nice brick walkway going down here. Well, this is a constructed wetland, and now there's actually a nice educational sign right here. This is a classic wetland construction, which we'd like to incorporate more out at this facility here. So what we've done is we've hired a entity, Horsley Witten, who we've worked with many years. Their engineers specialize in stormwater management, and the town has worked with them in the past as well. We're providing our dollars as a public service to the town so that they can do some preliminary planning of where their focus should be in terms of designing these systems for nutrient retention, bioretention, and then also additional flooding as well, relating to some of the larger scale storms. So in a nutshell, what we're trying to look at, this is the one from off island, but essentially what it does is, this is all the main collection line of your main trunk line of stormwater that comes out and then goes into a constructed wetland with a spillway, and then comes by through. This is very interesting. This one has a biosoil infiltration wall. And one little side note I was thinking is that the amount of wood chips that they have on site, those actually could be reused in a wetland system like this as well, because those are very good at filtering out certain pollutants as well, not just through air circulation, but through water circulation as well. Because that resource is there, we could definitely look into whether we could use that or not. So that then goes through that bioretention infiltration wall, comes out, and this isn't a quick area. This is a settling retention area where the plants utilize any nutrients that are in that water, and then the pollutants get broken down over time, and then comes out, and then out into the harbor as well. So again, we're looking at this type of thing at the land bank, but we're also looking at this throughout the island. Emily Molden, our resource ecologist, she's working with Rob and the town on different stormwater investigations in the downtown watershed. And one of the areas that's rising to the top is the town pier parking lot, and trying to do some innovative bioretention in that little park area that's right there before it goes directly out into the harbor. Because right now you have a stormwater system under that pavement. Water goes into the catch basins, into the trunk line, and directly out. There's no what we call pre-treatment whatsoever. This is for the dump. It's going to be about a $30,000 project that the Land Council has used its dollars to help. It's something that we want to start doing more, working with the town and utilizing our dollars in a really proactive way. One way that just a little quick plug. One way that we're doing this, working with our membership, is that we've created a new water fund, where it's a donor-restricted fund that donors can direct their money to those water projects, whether it's eelgrass, looking at eelgrass, whether it's stormwater management. We also have a project that's going to be doing a transplant of eelgrass as well in the harbor. These are projects that are very interesting, and definitely they have the ability to really have some life, have some boots. Boots on the ground projects is what Rob and I always say, in terms of really getting them done. Not just projects just for the sake of doing a project, but actually projects that actually have some importance as well. So that was really quick, I know, but any questions on that? Really what we're doing on a constant basis is looking at the water quality that's coming out of the dump, whether it's through the metals that are being tested, the testing that is being done to identify concentration of heavy metals, concentration of nutrients, utilizing that in terms of what we would like to be done on a long-term plan basis. Also working with Jeff and the Natural Resources Department to what they're seeing out on the surface water as well. And again, it's all part and parcel of this long-term planning that needs to be done, looking at how we want our landfill to sort of evolve, what sort of technology we want to use, not as it relates just to appropriate fiscal sense, but as it relates to natural resources protection. And then from a wider scheme and wider scale for the watershed itself, how that fits into long-term planning for sewers, for additional fertilizer control, for additional impervious surface reduction, things of that nature.
Cliff Williams again. We just talked about seasonal high water tables and hydraulic pressure and what's it mean to the water in general. What's the Land Council's position on draining the ponds?
Cliff, this is a landfill forum. It's water. I'm not going to go into that too much, really, because this is a landfill forum, but we've been fairly instrumental looking at the Sakacha openings and the Hummock Pond openings with the town, and actually devoting some of our membership donations to come up with plans that would create openings to the most effective nature possible. Because we do believe that a good flush in, for certain systems, Hummock particularly, and Sakacha, if you can get a good flush in of good clean seawater, that does provide some benefits for the system. There are, without getting into too much of it, there's also some potential negative aspects to that as well. But we have been, for the past, I say 5-7 years, working in a proactive way for the openings as it relates only to Hummock and Sakacha.
Bill Creeder, Nantucket. First off, thank you for holding this presentation. Those of us that have been concerned about trying to bring this to the forefront for the last several years have been looking for a daytime during the summer forum so that folks other than just those of us that deal with this on a daily basis could get some information. So thank you for doing that. 2 points. One, you're talking about the testing the wells that have been brought back online. About a year or so ago, the town gave itself a deliverable. I'm wondering what that result of that is, or if it started yet. And that was to do some testing of off-site available certified test points. For example, over by Massasoit Bridge, near Second Culvert, formerly known as Second Bridge. There's, these are all on private property or on public land, but they're certified test points. And the town was talking about doing that and the reason was to see if anything has made it underneath the long pond, as you were talking about getting to the groundwater. So, you know, if you don't have that answer, if you could, in your discussions with the town, if you could ask that question for us, it'd be great. The second one is in the study of the runoff and stuff at the dump. I haven't heard talk about what would seem to be a very consolidated and concentrated source of nitrogen, and that's all of the grass and clippings area that the landscapers are bringing in. It's my understanding that eventually that's taken and used as mix in the process of doing the mulch and loam and all that stuff. But in the meantime, we have this huge concentration of what would seem to be very heavily loaded nitrogen source. Is there anything to, as far as protecting that area from going into Long Pond, or is that planned in the future?
Great, Bill. I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to mention that, but I forgot. Just to briefly touch upon your first one, I'll circle back with Jeff and with Roberto in terms of what Bill was alluding to was doing some well sampling on the other side of Long Pond, expanding out from the existing well sampling that's right here. I'm not sure if they've done any or not, but I'll check in with them. The second point was really how this composting area is potentially affecting groundwater and the concerns for this. I'm going to jump to, where is that slide? Sorry. This one. You see this area right here? That's where all the composting of the yard waste is occurring. There is some settling when they move some windrows up in here, but the bulk of it is really just curing and settling right here. You'll see where the groundwater flow direction is. It's right there, right going this way into this vegetated wetland. This surface is pervious. It's traditionally, when you do something of this nature, you'd have an impervious surface, a concrete surface that then would collect any leachate that's going out below that composting facility and direct it to a bioswale or recollect it in some way. That's not being done here. I would note though that this surface is used so heavily in the northern areas that it almost acts as an impervious surface that goes from a south and north direction, as I said, to this swale, then to this swale. But like what I also said is that these are connected to groundwater, these retention basins, is my understanding, and that then goes directly to the ground. So this whole area is going to be incorporated in these plans that Horsley Witten is going to be discussing, whether we should actually be building impervious surfaces or using the compacted surface itself to direct that leachate going into bioswales that then would reduce some nutrients going into the pond, into the groundwater, then into the pond. That's our major concern, really, as it goes forward with this composting operation. This composting operation was never designed in terms of scale for the volume that we have right now. Certainly, as Tim noted, this was designed for the expected volume, but the yard and leaf waste, we've had an exponential amount of landscapers and landscaping companies since 1996, 97. So this area, really, we need to do our best to get this material off-site. We really need to do our best. We just don't have the interest in the material yet to get it off-site. We don't want it sitting around too long as it is right now. If we can get to an area where we can create sort of some impervious surface with a leachate collection system, then we'd be somewhat satisfied with a longer retention time out there. But really what we'd like to do is improve everyone's ability to, well, let me step back. We want to get the word out about the product more. We want to see the product used more. We want to get the testing that is being done of the product out in the public's hands so they understand that it actually can be used. We used it for our pollinator garden. It's fine. There is concern, quite frankly and honestly, about the residual glass that's still in there. I haven't been out there in about a year's time since we used it, and I've been told that the screens that they're using are really working much more effectively. So we'd like continued improvement on that, because why not use the product? It's a great product to be used. That's the whole point. We didn't want to just get through 7/8 of the cycle and stop there. We wanted it to be reused.
I'm going to add to that and just say that, as Cormac mentioned, this facility was never designed to handle leaf and yard waste or any of the brush or collected materials that have nutrient loading to the nowhere near the degree that it's currently happening. And to that, the leachate, let's call it leachate, but anything that's, when the material gets wet and flows, that material, believe it or not, off-island is collected and actually land applied by landscapers as natural fertilizer. It's high in all the good stuff that grows things, which is why it's a concern that if it in fact it would be streamlined right to open water body, it has the potential to grow things, macrobiology, microbiology, etc. And those things potentially have impacts to other life in the pond. So while we're sort of still answering the question whether or not everything that we're talking about is actually happening, we're now measuring nutrient loads in and around the landfill to a degree that we've never done before. And with Land Council's involvement now to expedite stormwater improvements to the site, we will definitely be looking at, as part of a component to that improvement process, what we can do in a meaningful way, whether it's a receiving area or in a processing area, to try to better manage runoff from our leaf and yard waste program. Most of the completed compost in any of its forms, whether it's wood chips, whether it's straight up leaf and yard waste compost, or as topsoil, or other material that's combined with the compost and the sludge material, each one of those products sort of has its benefits. And so, again, we want to make sure that we make the cleanest material we can. We want to get the information back to you to make sure that you're confident in reusing that material in whatever form you're going to reuse it, whether it's mulch banks for landscaping or growing tomatoes. We want to make sure you have confidence in those products that we're producing. So at the same time, we want to make sure that we're monitoring and identifying any true concerns to the water quality of Long Pond. So,
I've had a little experience building retention ponds, and now that you bring it to my attention, I think of things like best practices or minimum requirements by the DEP. When you build a road, at least when I do, you need like weirs and riprap and silk fencing, and it doesn't seem like you talk about, this thing kind of got away from us. Are we even meeting the minimum requirements of the DEP for the water runoff right now?
Yeah, so we had I'd say when I showed up in April last year, we had a lot of open surfaces out there. Mostly the perimeter of the site was largely reclaimed soils from the mining operation, which is largely sand. There's glass and small amounts of plastic that are mixed in with that, but it's largely sand. And again, around almost the entire rear perimeter of the entire site. However, because of that inert nature, glass, plastic, and sand don't necessarily grow grass very well. It existed as this sort of weird colored, weird brown colored object, mountain that existed in Nantucket. And frankly, a lot of people were sort of a little concerned. Why isn't this surface growing grass like we see in every other landfill slope? So I did reach out to, and there was some other issues going on at the time with regard to the retention pond system being breached by a previous operator out there. And at the same time, if there were ever any erosion controls, silt fence, hay bales, that sort of thing, if they had existed, they weren't out there in any meaningful way. So bringing these sort of things to the attention of Waste Options received an immediate response. Not only do they come in and repair the retention pond, they also surrounded the entire rear site along the wetland line with entrenched silt fence. It was fantastic, and they did it in time for the spring rains that did come almost immediately after the install, and captured a lot of the sand runoff that came down the slope as eroded material. Since then, with the new manager over there, they've taken steps to better grade their mining roads, which has resulted in substantially less mud because they're draining properly. They have covered the slopes with their own created compost materials, and they've hydroseeded, which has started to grow grass. So they've taken steps to address each and every one of those concerns.
Let's say that I took a tour with Rob when Rob started. It was probably about a year ago, and was very pleased with the new management attention towards some of the issues, with Rob's attention towards the issues. Certainly there's going forward room for improvement, but it's our opinion that we might as well work in a very proactive way in terms of identifying areas of cause and concern. The entity on island that would be speaking for the DEP would be the Conservation Commission. I think through Jeff, they're probably somewhat aware of potential concerns that are on out there. But really, where we need to focus our attention right now as it relates to wetlands, the use of the site as it relates to surrounding wetlands, is stormwater management. That's truly where it is. And then perhaps creating, as Rob pointed out, better areas for silt fencing with hay bales of that nature to reduce some of the runoff. And when I mean runoff, I mean as that relates to the stormwater. So certainly there's areas of cause for concern. I won't kid you, but I think there's definitely room for improvement. Yeah.
Leslie Forbes from Nantucket. You've mentioned, Cormac, a couple times that your understanding is that those retention ponds connect directly to groundwater. That's new news to me, and I wonder where that data is coming from. How do you know? What tests are done to provide the data that shows that's what's happening?
That was talking with some of the Waste Options personnel out there, and it was not an extensive conversation, but we did have a meeting with them. I think Rob was there as well, and then meetings on site, real brief when we were on site with some of the consultants when the flooding was taking place. And it wasn't just flooding as it related to the runoff from the impervious surfaces. It related as to the groundwater level rise. Is that correct? Yeah. So that's why we do have a feeling that they are directly connected to the groundwater, which in the permit probably was allowed. I mean, I don't think maybe or maybe not, but we're not necessarily going back to the permit to see if they were required to have lined retention basins. Not a lot of people were thinking about appropriate best management practices for stormwater runoff in the 90s, and it wasn't that long ago, but there's certainly ways to improve this in terms of getting some additional plants in there, cleaning out some of the muck, getting a better hydric soil in there. I don't see this as a difficulty in terms of creating a vibrant wetland community. It's kind of funny, but you see these in areas of reclamation sites such as this. Yeah.
In 1996, I don't think anybody was worried about nutrients leaving the dump. It was whether it was arsenic or other more hazardous known hazardous things. Nutrients were considered good. So then the other question I have in terms of the long-term planning of the landfill, I would hope that closing the landfill and shipping the items off island would be one of the options looked at. Is it?
Thank you for that, Leslie. I would say that, as I mentioned earlier to Tim, that no option will be, let's say, we will be, thank you, rejected. We will be looking at all options, including the sort of do nothing and continue as is option. So closing the landfill certainly has been discussed initially, and there's going to be certainly challenges with that, including the tremendous cost.
Jeff Smith, summer resident and winter resident. Just have a couple of quick questions. I wanted to wrap my head around the mining operation just a little bit more, Rob. Cormac, could you blow that out just a little bit? I don't know if you have. Yeah. Could you guys show us exactly kind of where the mining operation is and how many years it's been going on?
Sure.
What percentage of the cubic volume has been already removed and processed?
Okay. I'll do the best I can. We have the original landfill, essentially, if you could see this shape here, that was largely the original shape. They started mining, I believe, in 2009, thereabouts. So they essentially have been mining for almost 10 years.
Okay.
In that time, I did have a slide earlier. They started mining up in the top corner and sort of worked their way this way. So right now, I believe the limits of the unlined landfill is essentially this centerpiece here, and surrounded by reclaimed soils from that mining operation. It's also created space over here for lined landfill cell 2 and 2A and 2B, which is right here, and the construction of the new lined cell 3A with the option to expand into a 3B to the rear. And that whole site is surrounded by additional stockpiles of reclaimed soil. So what we're talking about capping that's remaining on the original unlined landfill is just that centerpiece.
Okay, thank you.
One thing too, I think you mentioned it, but maybe you didn't, but the leachate from the lined cell, it gets transported off.
Correct.
To the Surfside wastewater treatment plant.
You did mention that.
Okay, thanks.
Take a guess. How much has been mined in that 10 years? Would you say 40%?
Million yards. Just under a million yards.
Of 3 million cubic yards?
It's been discussed that the landfill has been halved.
Halved, okay. And follow-up question for you, Cormac. Like the land council's position in mining versus capping, there's going to be, over the next 10 years, let's say, there's going to be a lot of leachate that is basically directly into our groundwater. I would think, I'm for mining it, but now thinking about it a little bit more, capping it will solve that problem in an instant. Correct?
It depends about what the existing literature says from, is there any leachate that comes out of a capped area? It's not that it's completely 100% free of moisture.
There's some wicking probably.
You know, there might be some. I don't really, I think, you know, and again, I'm going to be freely honest with you. This is not my area of expertise. So when we do, if the Land Council does want to get into those conversations, and it probably should as it relates to water quality, we're going to have to sort of think long and hard and look through the literature, and also probably get consultants to advise us on whether we should continue our mining, whether capping should be the route to go. as it relates to the water quality.
It seems like this is a conversation that's it's almost like a fire drill here. We have 12 months to figure this out.
It is and it isn't, but what I have been told, and Rob, correct me if I'm wrong, this relates to the ACO that the town is under existing agreement with the DEP. If there is good faith effort of the town to say, look, we're really working towards a resolution of this issue, and this is my opinion, I don't see how that ACO couldn't get amended for another 9 to 12 months to say, look, we're really determining whether we want to cap or mine. Am I off base there?
Well, I will say we're certainly going to be sitting down with DEP this fall to have open discussions on all of these topics, whether we're coming in to request extension to the mining, putting off the capping, and just the future of the landfill and the operations itself. But to your point, is this stuff, is it cheap, or is it easier or more expeditious to just simply cap it and cut off the potential for leachate from the unlined cell from going out into the environment? Certainly capping it would stop it, sure. It wouldn't be forced into the ground by rain runoff. There's still moisture in the mound, and would it continue to leach at some rate? Sure. Mm-hmm. And would it continue to have some kind of hydraulic activity with the shallowness of the groundwater? Probably, sure. However, and this is more of a regulatory question or concern, DEP, your state environmental protection agency, has guidelines and has in their regulations that say, we are concerned when these sort of constituents, nasty things that are found in landfills, reach this elevated level and are within this proximity to a well.
Yeah.
So the point that sort of, in this different sort of highest priority to lowest priority, highest priority being a human well, where it's a dwelling that has a private well, right? And so I believe I do have a slide that shows the perimeter and the nearest houses are outside of the half-mile radius, and the regulatory realm or radius is significantly under that. It's 1,000 feet or something. But the point is that it has been looked at, and certainly as a state regulatory agency, had any triggers or thresholds been broken through the years with this facility located where it's at, there would have been requirements within that ACO requiring the town to take action to either end this, or there's examples off island of immediate connection to water systems or providing bottled water to those residents who may or are being directly affected. We have no evidence of that whatsoever here.
Okay,
and that's as it relates to the heavy metals for drinking water quality concerns, the drinking water quality thresholds and standards. Yeah, that's really what their requirements and their regulations conform to. And again, they've had fairly standard results as it relates to a site such as this. But it is critical, as you say, to really start thinking about whether we cap or whether we continue to mine long term. Yeah.
One last question.
Okay, thank you. Bat and cleanup time.
Okay.
I just wanted to ask Rob to comment, because there's been a few concerns raised today. I think it would be important. It seems like there may be a perception that there's no cap on the landfill right now. And there is, if I'm not mistaken, Rob, there is a temporary cap, and it's posi-shell. And it was required by DEP to cover that 20-acre hill, as Rob said earlier, with like a gunite-like material that when it's mixed with water kind of forms a temporary skin, if you will. And I just wanted to ask you, Rob, was my recollection of that correct? Because I wouldn't want that people to have the misinformation that's just running right down through that 20-acre hill for the last 20 years.
I would tell you that from my perspective, I do not believe there is a temporary cap of any nature. There's certainly evidence that there's some sort of plastic material near the surface on some slopes that's shallow and in some cases. But I wouldn't want to leave the impression to anybody that we have capped the landfill in any appreciable or regulatory defined way. So with that, there's certainly sloped surfaces that are grass established or vegetated established that are draining through swales, through stormwater systems. But it is, and there is, that water is then directed off the cap, off the top of the landfill. But there has been no regulatory defined cap put in place on any of the landfill, unlined or lined out there.
Right, I didn't mean to imply a membrane or anything.
Okay.
But I believe it was required that a temporary cap via posi shell be put on to keep runoff off
Sure.
the hill as opposed to penetrating through the hill.
Okay.
Just kind of curious. The other thing I wanted to say about that is, Robert, question. I guess I'm asking two.
That's two questions. So.
Man on second. I guess I would ask, my recollection, and Cormac, you mentioned it, I haven't looked, but it's my understanding that the perimeter wells that have been monitored for quite some time actually show no contaminant runoff, with one exception over the last 20 years. And I forget what the compound was that we had an anomaly one time on.
I believe.
We're out of time.
I believe it was cadmium, and again, those were for drinking water level standards. Yeah, and not nutrients. And we were concerned about potential bioaccumulation of those heavy metals that are related to aquatic animals and whatnot, not necessarily as it related to the drinking water, which is a lower standard. So we actually went out and did some fish testing in conjunction with the state to get fish tissue samples, eel tissue samples, and sent those off to the state almost over a year ago now. And bureaucratic lab work has still had us waiting to see if there's any bioaccumulation of those heavy metals. But your point is taken in that as it relates to drinking water standards, that there have been no significant hits is what was reported on by Rob and his consultants at the last landfill hearing. Is that the right?
It is. And so I appreciate that. And certainly it's an important discussion to have, Tim. I didn't leave up the slide, but there is a slide or people ought to know that the information is available. It's been made available. It's right up on the the DPW website under solid waste. And you can find each and every report going back some time now. And they're all current. The most recent was, I think, this past March.
Thank you.
Thank
Again,
you.
I want to echo thank you to the Civic League for giving us a chance to get together and talk about this important issue. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks everybody for coming. I want to thank Rob and Cormac.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It was great. It was terrific.
Yeah, I appreciate it.